All right, we're gonna check and see if you guys found the right asymptotes. So for vertical, remember it's setting the denominator equal to 0 and solving. You have to have your x equals and y equals for these. Do you guys remember why that is? Like why we're so picky about that part? It's because asymptotes are lines, and so every line needs the equation. If it was just an intercept, then that wouldn't matter, but for these you want to have the y equals and then the x equals. Okay, so it has to be the equation of the line. And then once you find that, you can go ahead and do the domain and range really quick because your domain is always going to exclude the vertical asymptote because it's going to be whatever makes that denominator 0. And then your range is going to exclude the horizontal asymptote. So we are just going to put a slash through that equal sign. And then we are going to do our table. Okay? On your table, do we remember what goes in the middle? Yes, that x equals that vertical asymptote there. So x equals -3. And then the way that you're plugging this into your calculator does matter. One thing I would do to check to make sure that I have it entered in correctly is at x equals -3, I should see an error, okay? So when I plug this in, because there's a negative on top, I'm going to put this in parentheses, and I'm also going to put the denominator in parentheses. You have to put the denominator in parentheses here because it's a binomial. You also want this whole thing in parentheses because of the -2 is on the outside. Okay, and then you can take a look at the graph so you can see where the branches are. And then for your table, okay, -3 is in the center. And then I like to put what happens at -3.5, so that's 0. I would choose -4 because that's a -1. I'd skip this, go to -5, which is -1.5. Okay, and then you don't always have to put like ones that are right next to each other. Like you can do the -1.8, -7 is the -1.75. I look for those points that are going to be a little bit easier for me to graph. Okay, so if I'm looking on this side, -2.5 is -4, and -2 is at -3, -1 is at -2.5, and then I would just scroll down and do 1 at -2.25. All right, and then when we're ready to graph, again, your asymptotes should be dashed lines. X equals -3 is a vertical. So 1, 2, -3. Okay, and then y is -2. Please just shut that. It is. Okay, and then these are plot coordinates. So -3.5 and -0. Okay, and then remember we're connecting these with a curve, and this is going to be going up. This is going to be going to the left. Okay, so make sure you have the arrows on both sides there. At -2.5 and at -4. At -2 and this is -4. -2 and at -3. At -1. At -2.5. and then you have your 2 branches there. Alright, so I want you guys to do part B. So start with vertical, horizontal, domain, and range. Okay, so when you're finding that vertical asymptote, remember you take the denominator, and the denominator, if you set it equal to 0 and solve here, you would add 1 to both sides. That's how you get your x equals 1. The horizontal is going to be your value of k, which is always added on the outside. Okay, and your y value is just equal to k. Okay, and then your domain will be x such that x cannot be 1. And then your range will be y such that y cannot be 2. And then make sure you're practicing putting this into your calculator. So the top is a positive 6, so I'm just going to do 6 divided by, and then we need another set of parentheses for the denominator. Okay, and then you have the plus 2 on the outside, and now we're going to go to our table. And then when you're looking at your table, remember, the middle is going to be the vertical, so x equals 1. And so I like to start at x equals 1. And if you don't have an error there for that middle, you know that something was entered incorrectly. Okay, because you should have an error in this middle spot, wherever that vertical asymptote is. Okay, so at 0.5, I'm at negative 10. Okay, at 0, I'm at negative 4. Do negative 1.5, that's a nice one. Negative 1, negative 1. Negative 2 is 0. And then I'm going to go to negative 5 and put a 1 in there. That way I get those whole numbers instead of dealing with those decimals, okay? You don't have to choose the exact same points I do. I just want you to understand why I'm choosing some of these. Okay, so at 1.5 I'm at 14. That's going to be off of my grid, but that's going to help me graph this. At 2 I'm at 8. 2.5 is 6. 3 is 5. 4 is 4. And then at 7 I'm at 3. Okay, so I'm not going to graph the 1.514. I'll put that one on there. And then I always like to put in my asymptotes before I graph, so I know how I want to curve my lines. Okay, so this was x equals 1, and then I have y equals 2. Okay, so a half and then 10. 0 and negative 4, negative 1, 1. Okay, so this is going to help me with my curve. Okay, and then you need the arrows on both sides, so make sure that you guys have that. So 1.5, 14 is like hanging out here. And then I have 2, 8. 3, 5. 4, 4. 7, 3. Okay, so again, this is just going to curve. this is going to occur. All right, and then do you guys remember the name of this graph? Hyperbola, yeah. All right, now the last thing we're going to learn how to do is how to write a function. Okay, so I left those directions from example 3 and they should not be there. We are not going to graph the function. We are actually given the graph of each function. Okay, so we're going to be given a graph. What we have to do is identify the values of A, H, and K. And then we're going to write a function for the graph of g of x equals a over x minus h plus k. All right, and then when you're doing this on your homework, you just need to see your work for this, okay? So we're going to start with labeling what the asymptotes are because those are going to connect to certain values. Okay, so we have here, if it's horizontal, it's y equals. So this is at y equals 6 according to the scale here. And this one is going to be at x equals -3, halfway in between the -4 and the -2. Okay, so if we look back up here, remember, our k value was equal to our y. So if y is 6, that means the value of k is 6. Okay, here we had x was equal to -3. Your h value is a minus the h, and whatever you get here is going to be your h value. When you plug it in, it's going to look like the opposite. Okay, so for the first step, we are going to find h and k. And we're going to plug those into g of x. Okay, so we're going to find h and k and plug into g of x. Okay, so we already found the h and the k. If you want a little reminder, remember that h is just going to be from the vertical asymptote, and k is going to be from the horizontal. Also put your x and your y. All right, so if we're plugging this into g of x, our formula, our function, notation, is g of x equals a over x minus h. So h is -3, so it's going to be x minus -3. And then plus k is going to be plus 6. Okay, so we know if you have minus a negative, it's going to change to a plus. I just want you to see how that changes. All right, so if we were to set that equal to 0, that's how we get the x equals -3. Okay, so your h value is going to match your x there. Okay, you may have noticed there's something else given to you on the graph. We're going to use the given point. Okay, and we're going to plug those in for x and y. Okay, so there's going to be a point given to you, and we're going to plug that in for x and y. I'm going to highlight the point on the graph. So our point is -6, 3. Okay, so we're plugging this in for x. Now, technically, there's no y. Y is the same thing as what? G of x. It's just your output, right? So x is your input, g of x is your output. Okay, so if we substitute 3 in for the output, we have 3 equals a over, and then instead of x plus 3, we're going to write -6 plus 3, and then this is plus 6. Okay, what we have to do is solve that for A. So we're solving that to find our A value. Okay, so we have 3 divided by A over negative 3 plus 6. To solve that for A, we have to move over the negative 6 first. If you multiply by negative 3, you have to remember to distribute. And a lot of times when people multiply by the denominator first, they forget the distribution. Okay, so if you move over the negative 6 first, you don't have to worry about the distribution. You can just multiply both sides by the denominator. Okay, so you will get 9 is equal to A. Trying to make it stand out, but that was not an A. Okay, so A is 9, and then your last step is to write g of x. Now, g of x is an equation, so you have to make sure that you write your g of x out. I know on the last test we had to write a function, like a growth function, and some people forgot to write the y equals. All right, you absolutely have to have your g of x equals here. You always have to have an input and an output. So your g of x is the output. Okay, the input is going to be x. So it's g of x equals 9 divided by x plus 3, because you plug in your h, and minus and negative is plus 3, and then you have your plus 6 on the outside. Okay, so this is going to be your function. Okay, so based on that, I'm going to let you try B. And I'll come around if you need any help on it. If you finish it quickly, you are welcome to keep working on that 9-3 homework. All right, if you're having some trouble with where to start, I always start by identifying the asymptotes here. So if it's a horizontal line, it's your y equals. So this is y equals negative 2. And remember, the y value always equates to the k. Okay, this y and k are connected. So I know if y is equal to negative 2, that my k value is negative 2. Okay, and that's one of the things we have to identify. For the x, if your x is negative 4, that gives you your value for h. Okay, and then in the first step, we're going to plug those into g of x. Okay, so we have g of x equals a over, and notice that it's x minus h. So x minus negative 4 is going to be plus 4, so you can just write it like that. And then I have minus 2. Okay, and then from there, we are going to use the given point. Okay, so the point that they give you is negative 5, 4. Okay, so they go in for x and y or x and g of x. Okay, x is your input, g of x is your output. So that means I have 4 equal to a over negative 5 plus 4. And we know negative 5 plus 4 is negative 1. You can leave it in the denominator, okay, or you can divide, because what's a divided by negative 1? It's negative a. So if you want to do that and then solve, you absolutely can. You would add 2 to both sides. Okay, and if you did this, you would divide by negative 1. If you kept it underneath, you would multiply by negative 1. They both have the same effect. And then once you find A, you are going to write your final equation. Okay, so 3 was solving, 4 is going to be the equation. So you have g of x equals, and then you plug in your A in the numerator, negative 6. And really, your final answer should just be this, but with the a plugged in. So it's negative 6 over x plus 4 minus 2. And then this is going to be your final answer. Alright, and then make sure you do the full homework section. So this is what I gave you on Friday. Okay, this is what is going to cover what we did today. And you guys can have the rest of the time to work on that.